Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, this afternoon, going to take a break from the A to Z of Scottish distilleries, just for a week or so, maybe two, I don't know. I just fancied doing something a little bit different, and so I thought, well, what can I do a bit different? I mean, I've got quite a fair few samples that have, I've been tasting for the whiskey magazine, and I thought, let's have a rummage in those, and I thought let's have a look at some really interesting American whiskies, and so that's what we're going to do today. Some of which I'm pretty certain you will know, some you might not be quite so familiar with. Some are relatively inexpensive, and some are horribly expensive. So as it's not one particular distillery, there's no need for any waffle. I'll just crack straight on and introduce this afternoon's little lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off this afternoon's little tasting with the West Distillery in Utah. Those of you that have got long memories can probably remember that I did an episode of the show a long time ago about their rye whiskies. This is, I believe, a relatively new bottling. It's called the Prairie Reserve Bourbon, and like a lot of their releases, is bottled from bourbon that they sourced from other distilleries. Two, in actual fact, it is a vatting of 6-year-old bourbon from Seagram's, which was distilled from 75% corn, 20% rye and 5% malted barley, blended with a 10-year-old bourbon sourced from Four Roses Distillery, and that was distilled from 60% corn, 35% rye and 5% malted barley, bottled at 46%. So I think that'll be an interesting one to kick off with. And while we're talking Four Roses, the second bottling we're going to be looking at is the Four Roses small batch. Now, I love the small batch. The 46% bottling, I think it's a great bourbon, especially for the money. I mean, it retails about 30 quid, 32, 33 quid, and it's just fantastic. As you probably know, I've done episodes of the show on it before. I did one on Four Roses itself, and I was not overly keen on the single barrel stuff. Just tasted like, a component part of, and I much preferred the small batch. So, but this is the sort of limited edition barrel strength version that they do. I think this is this year's release, 2015, or last year's release I should say, and was bottled at 54.3%, so could be interesting. The third bottling we'll be looking at is another one of my favourites. It's the Illlogic Rave, the Heaven Hill brand. 12-year-old is just, again, another fantastic whiskey to go for. And this is the single barrel 18-year-old, bottled at 45%, and not particularly cheap. I believe going for about £155, which is quite a step up from the last time I remember tasting it and stocking it. So we'll be expecting big things of that. Talking of expecting big things, we'll be looking at another Heaven Hill whiskey. Now, this is a very special bottling. It's the John E. Fitzgerald 20-year-old. Now, most bourbons don't really last that long. They get overly woody. Certainly there are some on the market, and I've tasted a few of them over the years, and sometimes they're really impressive, but can be a bit woody. So it'll be interesting to see what this one's like. Now, for those of you that don't know, the John E. Fitzgerald brand was bought by Heaven Hill in 1999 when they acquired the Bernheim distillery, and part of that was some very old stocks of wheated bourbon, which was originally distilled at the Stitzel-Weller distillery. So they had a number of it. Barrels, they bottled them over the years, but they apparently hung on to about a dozen barrels, which they set aside, and in 2013 they allegedly put the contents into stainless steel and then bottled them in 2015. And just to say this, if you thought the Illogic's Rave was expensive, this stuff was going for about $750 a bottle. Nice packaging, all that kind of stuff, you know. So some seriously, seriously old and archive stuff. So that will be interesting to see if whether that is living up to its price tag, shall we say. And finally, we're going to look at a couple of rye whiskies, just for the hell of it, really. The first one we'll be looking at is from California, and from the Sonoma County Distilling Company. This is the Cherrywood rye, bottled at 48%. It's made from a mash of 80% unmalted rye with some unmalted wheat and some bizarrely cherry smoked barley. So apparently double pot distilled, aged in new charred American oak, and then finished in used oak, so not to make it overly oaky. I believe it's relatively young. So I've tasted some of their stuff and it's hit and miss, I would say. So it'll be, but in saying that, they're doing some interesting stuff. You know, I think they even did one with wood chips, I believe, which was. But anyway, it's always nice to see them doing interesting stuff. And the final bottling we'll be looking at is the good old Pikesville rye. Now the sort of standard bottling, which I think is 40% or was 40%, was, I thought, a really good go-to rye. Not amazingly complex, but relatively inexpensive, and just showcased, you know, the classics of rye character. This is the special 6-year-old, 110% proof, or 55% ABV. So it'll be interesting to see what that one's like. So there you go. That's this afternoon's little lineup. I think some rather interesting stuff. So we'll crack on then. Okay, so let's have a look at the High West Prairie Reserve then. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Straightforward. There's some nice corn fatness, but not overly fat. The rye is adding a little bit of herbal, herbally spiciness. There's a touch of toffee. It's not too oaked. It's not overblown. It's quite subtle, quite gentle, quite harmonious actually. I mean, it's. I mean, I think it was it retails for about 43 quid, which is probably about right. It's maybe a little, like I say, a little bit straightforward, but you know, it's pleasant. It sort of feels intermediate in age, and yeah, there's not a lot more you can say about it. It is pretty pleasant. Palate. Pleasant. Not setting the world on fire yet. It's not a bad whiskey. There's a little bit more of the slightly singed toffee oak on the palate. Again, sort of starts with that sort of the corn character, the soft corniness. A little bit of herbal rye coming through, which sort of becomes slightly more spicier as you get towards the end. Pleasantly balanced. Harmonious, nothing really sort of stands out, or in a good or a bad way, I suppose. It's just a pleasant bourbon. So yeah, a good starter, I think, you know. And maybe 43 quid is possibly a little bit more expensive for the complexity on display, but yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, moving on to the Four Roses small batch. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Now, quite crisp, quite sharp in actual fact. A little bit of honey, some subtle corn. Very, very whiskey-like. Very, like I said, crisp. There's some lovely citrus, some orange. a little bit of honey. It's always a bit restrained, but there's a little bit of rye coming through, a little bit of almost kind of peppery spices, such violet. Oh, it's one of those sort of noses that I think needs time in the glass to sort of, you know, open up, and but it has this lovely crisp kind of character to it. A little bit of oak coming through now. So, you know, slightly charred oak. Palate. Oh, that's got some grip. That's really drinkable at this ABV. Slightly darker. It's got a slight wheatiness to it, and the sort of darker rye notes are certainly a lot far forward on the palate. There's a little bit of subtle corn adding a little bit of sweetness underneath, but it's very dry, very rye-y, quite intense, dusty. Not a huge amount of oak. Again, the oak is kind of sat in the background, a bit like the corn. It's just sort of adding some nice structure to it. Really dark, really almost treacly, but it's not thick, and it's got again that sort of lovely balance. That sort of citrus character is kind of giving it some really nice lift to it. Wonderfully long, really intense. That's a fabulous whiskey, and you would expect that for 83 quid. But yeah, that's good. Dry is a bit on the finish, but yeah, I like that. That's impressive. Okay, so let's move on to the Illlogic Rave. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Now that's got some maturity. It's got again, sort of quite a light, sort of whiskey-like kind of character. Some lovely dusty old oak, some violets, some licorice, some pure, almost licorice root. Getting some nice rye character coming through. Oh, it's got some intensity. That is really impressive. It's quite woody, but that sort of woodiness is well contained within the sort of the richness of the spirit. There's a little, almost acerbic note on the edges, quite crisp, edgy, but again just wonderfully balanced, wonderfully mature. A little bit of wood smoke. Very deep. I'm now getting some marzipan-y, sort of vanilla. The oak is kind of starting to assert itself, but not overly so. That is just really well balanced. Palate. Wow, that's a bitter finish. But it's got some lovely treacle that kind of like sort of balances that up. There's a little bit of spice, dry spice, herbal spice. Whoa, that's intense. I mean, I remember when I tasted this blind for the Whiskey Magazine, it had me in mind of Knob Creek with that sort of kind of bitter intensity. But there's some treacle there that's just kind of sitting at the edges, just kind of offsetting. But ooh, yeah, that's got some serious grip to it, some serious spice. Wonderfully mature, really complex. Touch of violets on the aftertaste. Yeah. And that is what's that retailing for? 155 quid. Yep, that's damn worth it. Right, okay, so on to the 20-year-old Johnny Fitzgerald. Let's see what nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, now you can smell the maturity on that. Almost kind of armagnac-y, sort of prunes, dried fruits, walnuts, mature, dusty, spicy rye. But it has again a sort of a real cleanness, a real crispness, serious intensity. I mean, yes, it's quite woody and spicy and definite walnut shell, touch of cinnamon, a little bit of baked fruit possibly. Oh, that is intense, that's deep. $750. A lot of money, but this is a lot of spirit, it has to be said. The wheaty notes quite are there. There's sort of that dark, wheaty flake kind of character. It's sort of not quite as intense as, say, something like the William LaRue Weller, which has it in absolute bucketfuls, but it's a lot more subtle. But the sort of wheat flake notes are kind of there. It's a sort of wheat flake, bran flake kind of character. Yeah, not getting a huge amount of corn, but quite a bit of rye as well. Just that wonderful maturity. It's the sort of nose you just sniff all day. It's just absolutely fantastic. A little bit of treacle coming through now. It's starting to darken a little bit and thicken. I mean, this is just changing all of the time, and I'm now getting a little bit of almost marzipan oiliness as the oak is starting to come through. A little bit more of corn coming through now. It's starting to get a little bit fatter, a little bit sweeter. Oh, that's just incredible, absolutely incredible. I just love spirits like this that just continually evolve in the glass. Palate. Ooh, that is good. Yes, it's woody, but those wood spices are just kept right at the edge with that sort of lovely, soft, treacly kind of character. Again, I'm certainly getting plenty of wheatiness, violets, a little bit of Mar kind of note coming through, which you kind of get with either very young bourbon or very old bourbon. I'm not saying the spirit is breaking down, but it just sort of gives you that kind of sort of Mari-like kind of character. Oh, just the length is incredible. It just goes on and on and on. There's plenty of wheaty notes. There's rye. There's a little bit of oak, vanilla oak, just a little bit. Really smoky aftertaste. Just wood smoke, char, treacle. Wow, that's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. I mean, if you actually were lucky enough to get hold of a bottle of that and not decided to drink it rather than keep it, ooh, that's damn good. Right, and so moving on to this kind of weird cherry smoked Bourbon-y American whiskey. Let's see what the nose gives on this. Well, that's not out of its nappies. I mean, this is kind of going from the sublime to the ridiculous. I mean, if this is 3 years old, then that's about it. It's fainty, impure, raw. Again, sort of lots of that kind of Mar kind of character. It's got a strange kind of almost cherry fruit note. Some smoke. Plenty of rye, herbal, almost astringent rye. This is not an easy nose at all, it has to be said. I mean, I just think this could have done with a little bit more longer, like another 3, 4, 5 years in oak. Alright, they didn't want to give it too much oak character, and indeed it hasn't got very much oak character at all. A little bit of wood spice on the edges, but it's just not removed the impurities of the spirit. It's just young, raw. I mean, it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. I just think this has been bottled far, far too soon. Power. Oh, that was a bit of a bitter hit. Kind of sucks the moisture out of your mouth. Fainty, almost cardboardy, but not quite. Raw, intense, slightly smoky, bitter, dry. I mean, I imagine, given some time, this would turn into a really interesting spirit. Loads and loads of rye character. It all comes through right on the finish. In actual fact, I think it could done with a bit more sweetness, a bit more vanilla oak. They obviously, I don't think they left it in the new oak cask for long enough. Certainly not to remove the impurities of the actual spirit. Yeah, it's got. I mean, I don't know whether it's subliminal because it's cherrywood smoke, but it does have a kind of cherry kind of character. It's sort of such sweet fruit note, which maybe with more time would have been sort of more prevalent. I mean, it's an interesting experiment. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't know what this actually retails for, but I imagine, like a lot of these experimental New World and American whiskies, it isn't going to be cheap, and it's probably not worth it as an experiment. Yes, all right, if you've got buckets of money, you know, and you sort of want to try all these weird and wonderful spirits, then brilliant. But it's just not really ready for the market, in my opinion. But Weetabix, get Weetabix on the finish, kind of. Yeah, it's on the right track. I mean, it's really interesting, but it's not there yet, and that's basically what I think. And finally, the Pikesville. Now, like I said right at the beginning of the show, Pikesville I think has always been a favourite of mine, just showcasing the sort of classic character of rye, American rye whiskey. So let's see what the barrel strength, or the 110 proof, should we say, gives on the nose. Very crisp, very clean, quite spicy, sort of the more peppery kind of spices, a little bit of herbalness, touch of oak. Now, I mean, I think this is the interesting thing. All of these whiskies, all of these Bourbons or American whiskies, have not been inundated with oak. The oak has all been very subtle, and that's quite nice in actual fact, because it allows the character of the rye or the corn or whatever to kind of come through now. And a lot of American whiskies can be sort of very, very heavy on the oak, you know, certainly the sweet, sort of the younger stuff, you know, Jim Beam White Label and Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 kind of spring to mind, but this has got just a lovely freshness, a crispness and intensity. Wonderfully spicy, slightly violety, dark honey. Ooh, that's a lovely rye, really intense. Some lovely complexity. I mean, I'm guessing at 6 years old it's probably double the age of the sort of standard bottling that they do, but even so, I mean, it's just an absolute classic rye whiskey. A little bit of coffee and that wonderful sort of spicy herbal rye. It's just there in your face, but not sort of, you know, too monstrous. It's all really quite elegant. Palate. Well, that's got a bit of bite to it. Some nice woody spice on the aftertaste. Again, a little bit more oak on the palate, but not so much as to kind of like be overly sweet and toffeed. So it's kind of, again, the rye is kind of left to sort of showcase that sort of herbal spice and slightly peppery spice. There's a nice underlying sort of slightly treacly sweetness, which kind of stops it from being too acerbic and astringent. But it's got some bite to it, some spice. That is a lovely, lovely rye, and just classic, absolute classic. Okay, so let's sum this little tasting up. I think all 6 of these whiskies are really very, very good value, and I certainly wouldn't be sorry if they were in my cupboard downstairs, but unfortunately they're not. But there you go. The High West Prairie Reserve, yeah, okay, does what it says on the tin. Maybe it's a little bit overpriced, but still, I really rate the distillery. I like what they're doing. Maybe one of these days they're going to sort of release a wholly, or maybe they have done, I don't know, I don't have any contact with the distillery. Maybe somebody will tell me if they actually have released some, bottling of their own rye rather than blending it, a la sort of, was a rendezvous, double rye. But pleasant, easygoing, nothing wrong with it whatsoever. 4 rows of small batch, yeah, absolutely spot on. Again, sort of lovely intensity, nice spiciness, kind of, again, subtle oak. Yep, sort of ticks all the right boxes as far as I'm concerned. The Elijah Craig, yeah, again, can't fault it. Slightly darker, slightly fuller, a little bit more kind of treacly kind of character. Lovely maturity. Like I said, it has that sort of knob creaky kind of hardness, but like I said, I mean, with that kind of age, you expect a bit more woodiness and a bit more sort of that kind of intensity. And but even though it has that, it has a balance, and it's really, really impressive. I'm trying to say. On to the John E. Fitzgerald. Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, no, that was stunning spirit, it has to be said, and I don't need to say anything more, do I really? Moving on to the Sonoma Cherrywood. I like what these guys are doing. They're pushing the envelope. Oh, I hate that term. All right, they're pushing some boundaries. They're trying interesting things. Brilliant, love it. Just leave it in the barrel until it's ready to be bottled. Stop bottling these things far too early. That's just what I would say. But then I've said that about numerous whiskies from sort of Australia and New Zealand and all over the place, and Germany, and I know there's a commercial pressure to get your product out there, make some money, so you can carry on. I understand that, but at the end of the day, there is no substitute for time. With any spirit, whiskey, American whiskey, bourbon, whatever, it just needs to be bottled when it's ready. And this, I think, was just bottled far too young. And finally, the Pikesville. Well, again, if you can find some, even if it's just a standard no age statement bottling that they do, get your hands on it, because Pikesville, just classic rye whiskey, just what it's all about. And the 110 proof has just got that little bit more intensity, which you would expect from being bottled at a higher ABV. But either way, I think really enjoyable. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show. I've got no idea what I'm going to be doing next week. It will probably come to me sort of midweek and think, yeah, I'll do that. But anyway, until then, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the show. And if you can get your hands on one of these interesting whiskies, then do so. And it'd be interesting to know what you think. If you've tried any of them, stick your comments, in YouTube, and we'll see. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.